Why did the room fall quiet the moment she stepped forward? Cassidy Blake felt it before she saw it, the way 47 men stopped breathing at once. Not because she was dangerous, not yet, but because she didn't belong. At least that's what the silence told her. She stood in formation under a pale California sky, fog still clinging to the edges of the base, her boots aligned with men who had already decided she would fail. She didn't flinch. 15 years of wanting this moment had taught her patience and pain. She was smaller than all of them, lighter, quieter, the only woman in a class that history had never prepared for. Her name stitched over her heart carried weight she never asked for. Her father had stood here once. Same base, same salt in the air. He never came home. Finish what I started. The words lived in her bones now. Not heroic, not loud, just heavy. When the instructor called for volunteers, the man who raised his hand didn't even look at her. He didn't need to. Confidence like his didn't bother with permission. When her name was called beside his, something dark flickered behind his eyes. She recognized it instantly. Not fear, ownership. Inside the kill house, the air changed. Rubber mats, gun oil, old sweat soaked into the walls. She listened as the rules were explained, already knowing them by heart. This wasn't about technique. This was about territory. She saw the decision land on his face seconds before it happened. The kick wasn't training, it was punishment. Pain exploded across her cheekbone, bright and disorienting. The floor rushed up. Blood filled her mouth. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet, too quiet, and she understood how easily this could end. How simple it would be to ring the bell, to let them say they were right. Laughter broke the silence, not all of it, just enough. "Try that again," he said, smiling. She tasted copper and something else, clarity. Cassidy Blake stood up. Her face throbbed, her vision swam, but her voice didn't shake when she said it. Again, one word, final. The room leaned forward without realizing it. This time when he moved, she was ready, not angry, focused. The difference mattered. The takedown was clean, efficient, quiet. His body hit the mat with a sound that ended every doubt in the room. She leaned close enough for him to hear what no one else could. "Try that again." She walked out bleeding, undefeated and more alone than ever. The medical tent smelled like antiseptic and consequences. Broken bone, concussion, mandatory withdrawal. Words meant to close doors. She asked for time instead. 48 hours. She knew bones didn't negotiate, but resolve sometimes did. That night alone in her rack, she documented everything. Photos, times, names, facts. She didn't cry. She built a case. By morning, the fog had burned off. So had something else. The illusion that this was just training. This was bigger, and she was already inside it. What do you do when survival isn't enough anymore? Cassidy learned quickly who would stand beside her when things turned real. One by one. Quiet conversations. No speeches, just choices. Honor showed itself in small ways, someone stopping at dawn, someone saying yes without asking what it would cost. She gathered statements the way others gathered weapons. Calm, methodical, personal. Her face healed in colors that told a story she didn't share. Her body hurt, but the waiting hurt more. Because beneath the assault was something else. A pattern. She could feel it tightening like a net. Then her grandfather called. The truth didn't arrive gently. It never does. Her father hadn't died by chance. Not really. He'd found something, someone. He'd been planning to report it. The route that morning had been clean until it was. The timing too precise. The silence afterward too complete. Cassidy sat on her rack as the words settled into her chest like stones. Murder wasn't a theory anymore. It was a lineage. And the people responsible weren't ghosts. They were still wearing the uniform. Hell Week began like a home invasion. Noise, smoke, chaos. Cassidy was already awake, dog tags warm against her skin, her father's name pressed into her sternum. She whispered the promise again, not as hope, as instruction. The ocean didn't care about her revelations. The cold tore into her the same way it tore into everyone. Surf torture stripped thought down to instinct. Time became irrelevant. Pain became background noise. She counted breaths. She remembered why she was here. When the sabotage came, it was subtle, a puncture, a delay, a moment where reporting it would have meant failing everyone. She chose differently, not recklessly, strategically. She patched it and said nothing. Later, when the collision threw her into rock and water and fire exploded through her shoulder, she understood how people died quietly, underestimated, exhausted, alone. She surfaced anyway. She finished. By the end of Hell Week, fewer than half remained. She was one of them, the first woman to do it. The cameras waited. She didn't stop. There was work left. She handed over the evidence days later, not with pride, with precision. The investigation began like an avalanche, slow, then unstoppable. And somewhere inside the machine, something noticed her. How many times can someone try to erase you before you become undeniable? Dive phase was supposed to be about control. Breath, calm, trust. Cassidy excelled, but excellence attracts attention. The wrong kind, too. Equipment failures, altered compasses. A rifle barrel cracked just enough to kill her quietly. Each time she survived. Each time the message sharpened. Stop asking questions. She forwarded the threat. Let them think fear had found her. Fear was useful when it told the truth. And the truth was this: someone high enough to touch everything wanted her gone. She kept training. She kept helping others. She kept her head down and her eyes open. When her grandfather arrived, the pieces finally fit together. Names, roles, money trails, 20 years of betrayal mapped across dead men and folded flags. Her father hadn't been alone, he'd just been early. The cabin in the mountains became a war room and a trap. They came after midnight, quiet, confident, a legend moving through the trees like he owned them. When the lights hit him, he fired anyway, old habits, old sins. He fell hard. On the ground, he told the truth because he believed it still gave him power. He named everyone, even the ones Cassidy didn't want to hear. The man who'd watched her get kicked, the one who'd promised protection. The realization landed like grief all over again. By dawn, arrests were happening across the country. The network collapsed in real time. Cassidy didn't cheer. Justice doesn't feel like that. What does victory cost when it arrives wrapped in names you trusted? The trials were public, clinical, necessary. Cassidy testified without trembling. Facts don't require anger. When the verdict came, the man who tried to break her wouldn't look at her. She didn't look away. Others fell too. Careers ended. Lives dismantled. The system cleaned itself because it had no choice. But justice didn't bring relief. It brought quiet. In court, they played her father's final transmission. His voice cracked through static and gunfire, steady even as everything fell apart. He knew, he'd known, and still he'd chosen truth. Cassidy wept where no one could see her. Weeks later, she stood in formation again. This time she belonged. The trident felt heavier than she imagined, not because of glory, because of memory. She was assigned to her father's team, not as legacy, as continuation. Why do some promises survive even death? At Arlington, the new headstone told the truth at last. She stood between two graves, one a father, one a woman who died believing truth mattered. Cassidy saluted, not sharply, not dramatically, just correctly. She didn't speak long, she didn't need to. She'd finished what he started. And now she would begin her own work. Because sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes dignity doesn't argue. Sometimes resilience bleeds quietly, stands up anyway, and changes everything. And sometimes the most powerful answer to cruelty is simply this. Again. What do you do when you realize the fight isn't just physical? Cassidy didn't sleep the night after the kick. The swelling had turned her face into something unfamiliar, purple blooming under her left eye, cheekbone thick and tight, vision slightly blurred at the edges. Every pulse of her heartbeat reminded her of the impact. But it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the pattern. She lay on her rack staring at the metal springs above her, listening to the low hum of men breathing in the dark. 47 candidates, 47 witnesses, and yet the silence in that room had felt practiced, conditioned. She replayed it in her mind, the hesitation from Senior Chief Vance, the absence of shock, the way Blackwell had smiled, not surprised when she stood again, but almost calculating. This hadn't been a temper tantrum. It had been a test. And tests were rarely given without someone approving the curriculum. Cassidy rolled onto her side slowly, pain spiking behind her eye. She welcomed it. Pain was honest. It didn't pretend to be something else. Her father had taught her something when she was young. After a scraped knee, after a failed math test, after the day they'd folded the flag into her hands. Emotion is real, he'd said, but evidence wins wars. So she built evidence. She slipped from her rack quietly, moved into the bathroom under harsh fluorescent light and took photographs. 6 angles, close, clinical, detached. She documented time, location, witnesses, exact words spoken. Maybe you should try that again. She wrote them down verbatim. The words didn't hurt as much when they were ink on a screen. They became smaller, manageable. She attached dates, filed notes, created backups. This wasn't revenge. This was containment. By morning, the base had returned to routine as if nothing had happened. That almost unsettled her more than the assault itself. Men ran drills. Instructors barked commands. The Pacific rolled in and out like it always had. But the glances followed her now. Some looked curious. Some looked impressed. Some looked irritated that she hadn't broken. She caught Blackwell watching her once near the chow hall. He didn't smile this time, he assessed. His jaw tight, his eyes sharp, like he was recalibrating. Good. Let him. By midday, her head pounded hard enough to blur the edges of her focus. The corpsman had been clear. Concussion protocol meant rest, evaluation, possible removal. She didn't report. Instead, she walked to the beach before dawn the next morning and found the one person she suspected still had something intact inside him. Petty Officer Jake Brennan was sitting on the sand, boots off, staring at the horizon like it owed him money. He looked up when she approached. His eyes flicked to her face and tightened. That kick was garbage, he said quietly. She didn't answer. I'll testify. No hesitation, no qualifiers. Why, she asked. He shrugged once. Because my dad didn't raise me to clap when someone cheats. Simple. Clean. Real. She nodded, one name secured. Later that afternoon, Marcus Sullivan cornered her near the obstacle course. He was quiet by nature, observant, the kind of man who didn't waste oxygen on useless noise. You filing? He asked. Yes. Good, he paused. I've got a daughter, she's 3. If she ever wants to stand somewhere people say she doesn't belong, I want her to know someone stood first. That landed deeper than she expected. 2 names. That night, as the bruise darkened and her cheek throbbed, Cassidy felt something unfamiliar creep in. Not fear. Isolation. Standing up had separated her from them, not because they resented her, but because now she represented something bigger, something disruptive. The only woman, the only one who refused to absorb the hit quietly. That came with distance. She missed her mother suddenly, the steadiness of her hands, the way she'd talk through complicated things like they were surgical procedures. Control your breathing, control your body, control the situation. Cassidy inhaled slowly, held it, released. Control the narrative. On the 3rd night, Chief Warrant Officer Dylan Granger approached her outside the barracks, older, weathered, eyes that had seen too many funerals. "Your father was my swim buddy," he said. Her spine straightened without permission. "He would have wanted you to fight this the right way. Not loud, not reckless, right." "I am," she replied. He handed her a small thumb drive. "Then you need to see this." Inside were 7 training clips. Blackwell across 3 years, excessive force, escalation beyond instruction, candidates injured, candidates quitting. Vance watching, not intervening. Her stomach turned cold. This wasn't bias. This was a system. And systems didn't collapse from emotion. They collapsed from exposure. She spent the next hours studying the footage like an engineer reviewing a structural failure, identifying patterns, frequency, escalation curves, victim selection. Weakest in the class, smaller candidates, those who spoke up. Sorry. It wasn't about gender. It was about control. But control thrives in silence. And she had already broken that. By the end of the week, the swelling in her face had gone down enough to pass a surface inspection. The ache remained, a reminder. She welcomed it. Hell Week loomed ahead like a storm line on the horizon. Most of the class whispered about surviving it. Cassidy was thinking beyond it, because something else was moving beneath the surface. Her grandfather called on day 6. His voice carried weight she hadn't heard before. "The report about your father," he began, "isn't the truth." And suddenly, the room felt smaller. He told her about the intel leak, about the suspicion, about the route that shouldn't have been compromised, about the analyst who had recently reopened the case and died. "Not suicide," he said quietly, "too convenient." Cassidy sat down slowly. "So someone killed him?" "Yes." "And they're still inside?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Her cheek throbbed faintly. Her shoulder hadn't even been injured yet, but something inside her already felt like it had separated from the joint. "They'll know who I am," she said finally. "They already do." The fog outside had burned off days ago. Now something else had burned off too. In a sense, Hell Week would test her body. But this would test her restraint. Because anger is loud. But justice is patient. And Cassidy Blake had just realized she wasn't fighting a man. She was fighting a legacy of betrayal. She ended the call and stared at her father's dog tags resting against her palm. "Finish what I started." She used to think it meant becoming a SEAL. Now she understood. It meant something far more dangerous. And she hadn't told anyone yet. Not about the leak. Not about the murder. Not about the names forming in the shadows. She slid the dog tags back beneath her shirt and stood. Training resumed in 10 minutes. And whatever was coming next, she would meet it standing. Why does the body fail long before the will does? Hell Week didn't begin with shouting for Cassidy Blake. It began with quiet. She was already awake when the doors exploded inward, instructors flooding the barracks with noise and smoke, blanks cracking through the air, boots slamming concrete. Chaos was the point. Shock the system. Strip comfort. Force instinct to the surface. Cassidy sat up calmly, dog tags already looped around her neck. Her father's tags rested beneath her shirt, cold against her skin. She pressed them once, briefly, not for strength, just for grounding. This was coming whether she was ready or not. Outside, the night air was sharp, the Pacific darker than she remembered. The surf line waited like an accusation. Men stumbled, some swore, some laughed too loudly, the sound brittle. Cassidy said nothing. The first hours blurred together. Running, pushes into freezing water, sand grinding into places it didn't belong, time dissolved. Hunger became background noise. Sleep stopped being an option and became a memory. By hour 12, she felt the first crack not in muscle but in thought. The cold crept deeper past skin and into intention. It whispered suggestions. You could stop. Just ring the bell. No one would blame you. She answered it the way her mother had taught her during long nights in oncology wards. One breath at a time. Nothing else exists. Surf torture arrived before dawn. They were ordered down into the water, arms locked, bodies pressed together, waves breaking over their chests and faces. The ocean didn't rush. It took its time, cold like teeth, cold that made hands forget how to close. Cassidy focused on the sound of breathing around her. In, out, in, out. Men started shaking uncontrollably. Someone vomited seawater. Someone cried quietly, ashamed of the sound. Cassidy stared at the horizon and thought about nothing at all. That was how she survived the first day. The sabotage came on the second. Rock portage, inflatable boats, jagged coastline, the evolution designed to teach one lesson: nature doesn't negotiate. Cassidy checked her equipment the way her grandfather had drilled into her since childhood. Once, twice, 3 times. That's when she saw it. A small puncture in the air chamber, clean, precise, fresh. Not damage. A message. Reporting it would disqualify the entire crew. Group failure, group memory, group resentment. Hell, weak culture didn't forgive that kind of thing. She had 4 seconds to decide. Cassidy patched it. Said nothing. The waves were higher than forecast. 6, maybe 8 feet. Enough to flip boats, enough to break bones against stone. They launched anyway, paddles cutting through black water as instructors watched from safety. Halfway through, she saw him. Blackwell wasn't participating. He was observing, helping run the evolution. His boat angled just enough to intercept. The collision came hard and wrong. Cassidy felt herself lift, weightless for a fraction of a second before instinct twisted her body. Protect the head. Always protect the head. Her shoulder took the rock. Pain detonated white-hot, so sharp it stole her breath completely. Then the wave came, forcing her underwater, gear dragging her down as the ocean tried to finish what the rock had started. This is how people die in training, a voice in her head noted distantly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Her left arm didn't respond. That mattered less than air. She kicked, surfaced, gasped. Hands grabbed her. Sullivan hauled her back into the boat, eyes wide when he saw the angle of her shoulder. Jesus, he muttered. Cassidy swallowed against the scream clawing up her throat. We finish, she said. They did. 3rd out of 8 boats. She didn't celebrate. She cradled her useless arm and focused on not blacking out. The corpsman took one look and shook his head. You're done. Cassidy met his eyes steadily. Tape it. This can permanently. Tape it. Something in her expression shifted his tone. He sighed, wrapped her shoulder, handed her painkillers she barely registered. 48 hours, he said quietly. Then you get imaging. She nodded. 48 hours was an eternity in Hell Week. By hour 43, her body was shaking constantly, not from cold anymore, from exhaustion so deep it felt cellular. Her thoughts came slower, simpler. But she was still standing. Blackwell watched from the beach, arms crossed, something unreadable tightening his face. She could feel his expectation that she would finally fail, that the ocean or her shoulder or the sleep deprivation would finish what his kick hadn't. She denied him that satisfaction. Hell Week ended without ceremony. 14 remained. Cassidy Blake was one of them. The first woman. The announcement didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, almost private, like a truth spoken softly after a long argument. Media wanted her. The command wanted photos, statements, proof of progress. Cassidy declined. She had a different mission now. 2 days later, she sat across from a JAG attorney and slid a folder across the desk. Medical records, witness statements, video footage, timelines. The attorney didn't interrupt. She just turned pages slowly, carefully. "This is thorough," she said finally. "My mother was a surgeon," Cassidy replied. "She taught me documentation matters." "Why wait until after Hell Week?" Cassidy didn't answer immediately. "Because I needed him to see he didn't break me. Because I needed the system to understand this wasn't weakness. Because I needed to finish something first." "Instead," she said, "because quitting would have been easier, and I don't do easy." The investigation opened like a fault line. 3 days later, Blackwell was suspended. 4 days later, cyber forensics found classified files on his personal laptop. 5 days later, Cassidy learned the truth was larger than one man's cruelty. NCIS called her off base, quiet location, no uniforms. The agent across from her looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Blackwell wasn't just abusive, she said. He was stealing intel. Cassidy's grip tightened around her coffee. "And forwarding it to a contractor, a front, a name that echoed one her grandfather had spoken months earlier. This wasn't coincidence. This was inheritance. You're not just a witness anymore," the agent continued. "You're bait." Cassidy absorbed that without flinching. "Good," she said. "Because somewhere deep beneath the bruises, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the weight of promises made to the dead." She understood something now. Survival was no longer the goal. Truth was. And she was willing to bleed for it. Because sometimes resilience isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to disappear when the world keeps trying to erase you. And Cassidy Blake was still here. What happens when staying alive becomes an act of defiance? Phase 2 should have felt like relief. Compared to Hell Week, dive training was quieter, more technical, less screaming, less chaos. But Cassidy Blake learned quickly that silence could be more dangerous than noise. In the water, mistakes didn't announce themselves. They waited. Her shoulders still ached, deep and structural, a reminder that healing and readiness weren't the same thing. She compensated without thinking, letting her body adjust around the injury. No one commented. In this world, you learn not to ask questions you didn't want answers to. She excelled. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently, calm breathing, perfect buoyancy. No panic during drown-proofing when her hands and feet were bound and the instinct to fight surged like fire in her chest. She let it pass, floated, trusted physics over fear. That unsettled people more than failure ever could. One night, after hours, she stayed late in the pool helping Brennan. He struggled with the bindings, the slow burn of air hunger twisting his focus inward until everything narrowed to terror. "You're not drowning," she told him softly. "You're reacting to the idea of it. Those aren't the same thing." "How do you know?" he rasped. "Because fear lies," she said. "Your body doesn't." It worked eventually. Word spread, not that she was special, but that she was steady. Instructors noticed. So did others. And so did whoever was watching. The first warning came quietly. During a night ocean swim, her compass felt wrong. Subtle, just enough to drift them east, toward shipping lanes, toward freighters that wouldn't see a swimmer until it was too late. She caught it in time. Didn't report it. Just corrected. The second warning was louder. An email, no sender name, no signature. "Stop asking questions. Your father didn't listen either." Her fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then she forwarded it to the NCIS agent and deleted it. Let them think it had landed. Let them believe fear had taken root. Fear could be useful. Weeks later on the rifle range, she felt it again, that quiet sense that something wasn't right. The weapon sat heavier than usual. The recoil pattern felt off. The ceasefire came seconds, before she pulled the trigger. The instructor inspected the barrel and went very still. A hairline crack, nearly invisible, catastrophic at full discharge. Accident on paper. Murder in practice. That night, Senior Chief Vance called her on a secure line. "You need to tell me what's happening," he said. She considered lying, chose not to. "I think someone trying to kill me," she said evenly. Silence stretched, then quieter. "I believe you." That admission changed something, not trust, not yet, but acknowledgement. "You want me to pull you from training?" he asked. "No." "Then you understand what that means." "Yes," she said, "it means they'll try harder." A pause. "Your father said the same thing." That stopped her cold. "Did he know?" she asked. "He knew the risk," Vance replied. "Did it anyway." Cassidy ended the call staring at the wall, the weight of that echo settling into her chest. The line between courage and inheritance blurred until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. 2 days later, Vance called her into his office. "You're a problem," he said without preamble. She met his eyes. "I get that a lot." He didn't smile. "Because you're not failing, because you make others look at things they'd rather ignore." He slid a file across the desk, her scores, her evaluations, her name circled in red more than once. "You know Phase 3 is live fire," he continued. "Explosives, long-range navigation, accidents happen." "I know." "And you know your father died in what looked like one." She did now. "You think it's connected," she said. "I think patterns don't lie," Vance replied. "And I think you inherited his inability to let things go." She leaned forward slightly. "So did you let him die?" The question hung between them, heavy, dangerous. "No," he said finally, "but I didn't protect him either." He stood, opened a drawer, and handed her a sat phone. "You call me anytime," he said. "Day or night, I won't make that mistake twice." She took it. The metal felt colder than it should have. That weekend, she left base quietly. Her grandfather's cabin sat deep in the mountains, isolated and deliberate, defensive by design. Old habits never really died. He didn't ask how training was going. He studied her face, her posture, the way she favored one side. "Someone been trying to kill you," he said. "Yes." "Good," he replied. "Then we're on schedule." They laid everything out on the table. Years of investigation, financial records, names, photos, roles within the network. It was worse than she imagined. Deeper, older. Men she'd been taught to respect. Men who'd shaken her hand. Men who'd stood at her father's funeral. At 2:00 a.m., the perimeter alarm chirped. 2 vehicles, no lights. Her heart didn't race, it slowed. This was it. They took positions. The night pressed in. Breath sounded loud in her ears. The waiting stretched thin and sharp. Then the lights came on all at once. The ambush unfolded with brutal efficiency. Flashlights, commands, bodies moving fast and sure, a figure on the ground, zip ties, silence. When she stepped outside, she saw him. The man who'd ordered her father's death. The man who tried to erase her. He smiled up at her, defiant even in defeat. "You're harder to kill than you look," he said. She didn't respond. Because this wasn't about words anymore. By dawn, the network began to collapse. Arrests in multiple states, doors kicked in, phones seized, accounts frozen. The truth moved faster once it was finally allowed to. In interrogation, he talked, because he believed knowledge still made him powerful. He named names. He confirmed fears. He said her father had been eliminated because he wouldn't stop digging. He said she'd been targeted because she carried the same instinct. He said she should have died quietly. Cassidy listened without interruption. Later alone, she felt it, the weight of it all pressing down, not triumph, not relief. Grief. For her father, for the analyst who died trying to help, for the men who never knew they'd been sold out. Justice didn't feel clean. It felt necessary. And costly. She returned to training with a different gravity, fewer illusions, sharper focus. Phase 3 loomed. Live fire. Explosives. The place where mistakes were permanent. But Cassidy Blake had already learned the most important lesson. Survival wasn't passive. Sometimes it was the loudest accusation you could make. And she wasn't done accusing yet. What if the final test isn't about strength, but about who you choose to be when no one is watching? Phase 3 began without ceremony. No speeches, no congratulations for surviving what had already broken most of the class, just a new kind of silence, the kind that meant every mistake would echo louder now. Live fire changed the air. You could smell it before you heard it. Cordite, oil, metal warmed by friction. It wasn't chaos, it was precision. Angles, timing, trust measured in inches. Cassidy felt the shift immediately. Her shoulder had healed enough to function, but it still whispered when she pushed too hard. She treated it like a conversation, not a limitation. Adjust, compensate, stay honest with your body. The first demolition exercise was controlled. Textbook, set charge, clear radius, detonate, evaluate. She loved the quiet seconds before ignition, the stillness where everything depended on preparation. That space felt familiar, like surgery rooms she'd waited in as a child. Controlled tension, no wasted motion. Blake, the instructor called, tossing her the initiator. You're up. She knelt, hands steady, running through the sequence internally. Her mind didn't wander anymore. It couldn't afford to. Click. Step back. The explosion rolled outward, contained, clean. Good, the instructor muttered. Approval here was rare currency. But someone else was watching too. Later that week, during a long-range land navigation evolution through rugged terrain, she felt it again, that subtle disruption in the pattern. The map coordinates didn't match the terrain features, not slightly, significantly. Someone had altered her grid. She didn't announce it. She recalculated manually. It cost her time, energy, position. She finished fourth instead of first. And she knew that was the point. When she returned to the staging area, she found Brennan sitting alone, helmet in his hands. They're cutting Sullivan, he said quietly. Her chest tightened. Why? Stress fracture, tibia. They're saying it's non-negotiable. Cassidy nodded once. Injuries were part of the bargain, but something about it felt off. She found Sullivan in medical, jaw tight but eyes calm. I'm not broken, he told her. I know. They're rotating someone in to replace me for final exercise. Her pulse slowed. Who? He gave her a look that answered before he spoke. Blackwell. Not as instructor this time. As operational advisor. Officially reinstated pending review. Technicality, loophole, institutional memory protecting its own. The investigation hadn't fully closed. Charges moved slowly when reputations were involved. Cassidy felt something old stir inside her. Not rage, not fear. Clarity. Final field training exercise. 48 hours. Simulated hostile territory. Limited supplies. Real ammunition. Real consequences. She studied the roster that night. Her team, Brennan, 2 others, and Blackwell observing at close proximity. He wanted proximity. He wanted pressure. He wanted to watch her finally crack. The first night of the exercise dropped temperatures lower than forecast. Wind sliced across the ridgeline as they established a concealed overwatch position. Cassidy lay prone, rifle steady, breath controlled. Through the scope, distant movement flickered. Heat signatures, targets marked for identification. Blackwell crouched behind her. You always this tense, he murmured quietly just for her. She didn't respond. Or is it just around me? Still nothing. Careful, Blake, pride gets people killed. She adjusted her scope 1 millimeter to the left. Sloppiness does too, she said evenly. He smiled at that. Hours passed. On movement to secondary position, the ambush came unexpectedly, not simulated, not scheduled. Real rounds cracked through brush. For a split second, confusion rippled through the team. This wasn't part of the exercise. Cassidy didn't freeze. Cover, she shouted, already shifting to higher ground. Her body moved before her thoughts fully formed. Angles, fields of fire, identify origin. 2 shooters, elevated, suppressed weapons. Not trainees. Her heart beat steady, almost slow. The world narrowed to geometry. She returned fire deliberately, not wildly. Brennan flanked left. The others adjusted. Blackwell hesitated. Just long enough for her to notice. Just long enough to confirm something she had suspected for months. The shooters weren't aiming randomly. They were triangulating her position. This wasn't a training accident. This was cleanup. She shifted positions mid-burst, forcing them to reacquire. Brennan took one down. The second retreated. Silence returned, heavier than before. No casualties. No immediate answers. Command arrived 20 minutes later. Confusion, radios buzzing, faces pale. Official statement would call it a rogue threat actor. Cassidy knew better. So did Blackwell. He approached her after debrief, face tight. "You think I set that up?" he asked quietly. "I think you hesitated," she replied. His jaw flexed. "You're not the only one who lost something in this," he said. For the first time she saw it, not arrogance, not cruelty. Fear. He wasn't protecting himself anymore. He was protecting something larger. "Walk away," he told her softly. "You've proven your point." She held his gaze. "I'm not here to prove a point." "Then what are you here for?" She thought of her father, of the analyst, of Sullivan's daughter, of the email that told her to stop digging. "I'm here because someone has to stay," she said. The investigation reopened publicly after the ambush. Too visible now, too dangerous to bury. Blackwell resigned 2 days later. Officially for personal reasons. Unofficially because the walls were closing in. Graduation approached. Cassidy stood in formation under clear blue sky, the ocean stretching endless behind them. Families gathered. Cameras flashed. Her grandfather stood rigid in the crowd. When her name was called, applause felt distant, muted. The trident pinned against her uniform carried weight far beyond metal. First woman to make it through this class. But that wasn't the victory. After the ceremony, Blackwell waited near the edge of the lot. No uniform, no rank. Just a man. "I didn't order the ambush," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I knew something was coming." "Yes. And I didn't stop it." She studied him for a long moment. "You had your chance," she said. He nodded once, acceptance, regret. "Try that again," he said quietly, echoing the words he'd once thrown at her like a weapon. But now they sounded different. Not a challenge. A confession. She didn't answer. Because she didn't need to. She walked past him toward her grandfather, toward whatever came next. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to become what tried to break you. And Cassidy Blake was still choosing. What remains when the noise finally fades? Cassidy Blake stood alone on the edge of the airfield, long after the crowd had gone. The banners were down, the chairs folded. The ocean breeze carried scraps of applause that no longer belonged to anyone. Evening light stretched low and gold across the concrete, softening a place that rarely softened for anyone. She loosened her collar and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. Becoming wasn't the ending. It never was. 3 weeks later, she was airborne. The mission briefing had been sparse by design. No dramatics, no speeches, just coordinates, risk probabilities, and a name that hadn't been spoken aloud in a long time. A name that lived in redacted lines and sealed envelopes. Cassidy listened without comment, absorbing details the way she always had, quietly, completely. "You're the right fit," the commander said at the end, studying her face. "Not because of what you survived, because of how you think." She nodded once. The aircraft vibrated beneath her boots as they lifted off. Inside, the cabin hummed with restrained energy. Men and women checked gear, adjusted straps, shared looks that said everything words couldn't. Cassidy sat near the ramp, helmet resting against her knee, rifle secure. She felt the familiar calm settle in, the one that came when purpose replaced doubt. This wasn't about legacy. It was about precision. The insertion went clean. Night swallowed them whole, stars fractured by cloud cover. The terrain below was unforgiving, rock, scrub, silence thick enough to feel like pressure. They moved fast, controlled, every step deliberate. The target compound sat tucked into a valley like a secret that believed it was safe. Intelligence said otherwise. So did Cassidy's instincts. She trusted those more. They breached without resistance. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old decisions. Data drives, ledgers, communications equipment too sophisticated for the story they'd been told. This wasn't a single node. It was an archive. Cassidy worked quickly, photographing, cataloging, securing. Every file felt like another thread pulled loose from a tapestry built on lies. In the back room, she found what she hadn't expected. A hard drive labeled only with a date. Her father's last mission. Her chest tightened, not painfully but deeply, like something long dislocated finally settling back into place. She didn't open it there. Some truths deserved space. The exfiltration was smooth, almost too smooth, but she didn't chase the feeling. She learned the cost of that. Back on base, hours later, she sat alone in a small, secure room and finally accessed the drive. Her father's voice filled the speakers, calm and steady even through distortion. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then I didn't make it back." Cassidy closed her eyes. "I didn't want this to become yours," he continued. "But I also knew it might. If it did, I'm sorry, and I'm proud of you already." He spoke about the network, the compromises, the moment he realized reporting it would likely end him, not dramatically, just inevitably. "I stayed," he said simply, "because someone had to." Tears slid down her cheeks silently. She didn't wipe them away. When the recording ended, Cassidy sat still for a long time. Grief wasn't loud anymore. It was familiar. The fallout from the mission rippled outward quickly. Oversight committees, quiet resignations, long-delayed accountability. The machine corrected itself the only way it ever did, slowly, reluctantly, and because it had no other choice. Cassidy declined interviews. She declined recognition. She accepted one thing: a new assignment. This one didn't come with a name or a patch, just a mandate. Identify fractures before they became funerals. Intervene quietly. Protect without spectacle. She excelled. Months passed, then a year. She trained others now, not by intimidation, by example, by steadiness, by refusing to confuse cruelty with strength. Sometimes she saw the same look in a candidate's eyes that she'd once seen in her own. The quiet question: "Do I belong here?" She never answered it directly. She just stayed. One evening she visited Arlington again. The light was soft, the air still. She stood between the two headstones, hands clasped behind her back. "I stayed," she said quietly, "just like you did." No response came, but she hadn't expected one. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A new file, a new name, a new place where silence had grown too thick. Cassidy slipped the phone back into her pocket and walked on. Because sometimes resilience doesn't look like victory. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like choosing restraint over rage, truth over comfort, presence over applause. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.